It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. This week, Monster Mondays invites you to a very exclusive club where you'll be treated to entertainment and be regaled by 3 stories of twists, turns, and horror. Welcome to the Monster Club. This film was released in the spring of 1981, and it comes to us from Britain and some recognizable folks. This was produced by Milton Subotsky and directed by Roy Ward Baker. The Monster Club stars horror greats such as Vincent Price, John Carradine, Donald Pleasance, Richard Johnson, Britt Eklund, and Patrick McGee as part of an ensemble cast to fill out the various stories being relayed from Vincent Price's Aramis to John Carradine's R. Chetwynd Hayes. Now, I just threw a bunch of names out at you, but I wanted to do so to make my next set of points. The Monster Club is kind of a remnant of a popular form of horror movie from England that will, very shortly after this film's release, be revitalized and become quite popular in a couple of ways in the United States. The anthology. Yes, this movie features 3 tales with a wraparound story that features Carradine and Price in particular. Now, Milton Subotsky was one of 2 founders of Amicus Productions, and Amicus was often thought of as either the rival or little brother of sorts to Hammer Films. Both companies were located in England, both specialized in horror, with Hammer doing more gothic horror and Amicus being more modern with just a little hint of a gothic feel. Both often employed the same actors, in particular Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. In fact, both of them were approached to star opposite Vincent Price, but both declined. Amicus became known for their portmanteau films, and that's just a fancy term for anthologies. In the early 70s, Amicus had their biggest hits by releasing 4 portmanteau films, 1972's Asylum, 1974's From Beyond the Grave, and 2 adaptations of 2 separate American horror comic books from a company that was central in the big mid-50s hubbub that eventually led to the formation of the dreaded Comics Code Authority, and that would be EC Comics. These were 1972's Tales from the Crypt and 1973's The Vault of Horror. Of those 4 films that I talked about, all but Tales from the Crypt were directed by this film's director, Roy Ward Baker. And Baker had worked with both Amicus and Hammer in the 60s and 70s. The Monster Club would be the final film Baker would make before he transitioned fully to television, which he started to kind of delve into at the end of the 70s. Baker has had a couple of movies already previously featured on Monster Mondays, The Vampire Lovers and Scars of Dracula, both released in 1970 from Hammer. There is yet another big-time Amicus anthology that I want you to kind of put a bookmark on, as it will be talked about in much greater detail next week. But this is kind of an interesting film. Its stories are based on the works of real-life writer R. Chetwynd Hayes, who is played by Carradine in this film, as a kind of meta-representation of the real writer inside his own works, if you get what I'm saying there. Chetwynd Hayes was ultimately unimpressed by this film. I think the reason why is what makes this movie that much more entertaining and interesting to me. This film is a little cheeky in terms of mixing horror with humor, and it's a little bit of a mixed genre film, and we'll talk more about that later. But the movie was largely unknown to most outside of Europe. It did get released in the UK and other parts of Europe, and you'll more likely find images and posters from Spain or other countries than you will from English countries. It kind of languished in obscurity for most American audiences, except that it exists and has something of a vague, distant memory for many, because it likely did get played on TV for a short bit in the 80s before disappearing into kind of obscurity. But not long ago, Shudder picked it up and it got played on The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs. It is currently available on several free streaming sites like Tubi and the Roku channel, yet I don't believe there is currently an official DVD or Blu-ray release of it in America. It had been briefly made available through a few distributors, and you can likely dig deep enough to find someone still having stock of a DVD of it from Scorpion releasing. But as of this time that I am making this episode, it's mostly just available via streaming or in the gray market from handy dandy personal dealers, if you catch my drift. But one night, our Chetwynd Hayes is walking along the street and is approached by the famished Aramis. And Chetwynd Hayes says that he would do anything for Aramis to get him a bite to eat. And it turns out that Aramis is a vampire, so he takes some blood from Chetwynd Hayes and regains his strength. And Aramis says he would like to repay his favorite writer by giving him some inspiration for some more stories. So he takes him to the Monster Club, where various monsters and ghouls rock out and dance and listen to, well, rock and roll. But Aramis talks about this poster on the wall that shows the genealogical chart that explains a lot of crossbreeding between various monsters. It leads us into the first story, the Shadmock. Now, a Shadmock is the result of two hybrid creatures breeding. So, it's really kind of... it's a multi-generational type of creature that's much further down the genealogy tree, but it also can kind of be looked at as maybe a lower creature of sorts if we want to kind of get into that into that thought. But anyway, a man is catatonic in a mental institution at the start of this, and we flash back to when his girlfriend Angela picks up a job at a secluded mansion. There, she meets Raven. Now, Raven is a Shadmock, and Raven's had a pretty sad life. And he says that people have a difficult time working for him. When she inquires why, he shows his face, which frightens her off. There's nothing particularly terrifying or horrible about his face. It's just a terrifying feeling that people get when they see him. Now, it turns out that Angela and her boyfriend seemingly wants to rip the guy off. So she makes a comment about how he's got quote unquote good stuff. And so her boyfriend convinces Angela to return, and she does. And Raven is rather surprised. He says he's never really had any friends, and he can't really go out because it kind of alludes to what his effect is on people, but he also talks about the noise and everything. So it's maybe a little bit of a sensory overload, but he does get visited by family sometimes, but that's because, as he says, they're different. And as Angela continues to come around to catalog Raven's old antiques, he grows quite fond of her. And he even starts to shower her with flowers. And this gives Angela second thoughts about betraying him and ripping him off. Angela continues to insist that she's terrified of him. And there's just something about him that she thinks is terrible. And she worries about what he's capable of in particular. And what we do find out then what a Shadmock like Raven can do and what he's capable of. When one of his bird friends that he feeds and spends most of his time with outside is killed by a wild cat that kind of stalks around his property, he whistles, which causes the cat to melt into a smoldering pile of goo. As he hides himself away after what he's done, Angela's boyfriend suggests that this is the perfect time for her to look for a safe where surely a treasure awaits them. Raven asks Angela to marry him as she continues to come around despite his hiding away and despite his perceived ugliness. Well, now feeling terrible about this, she really doesn't want to hurt the poor guy, but her boyfriend continues her to basically convinces her to continue to play along, and that will provide her access to seeing the combination to the safe that he has behind a fake set of shelves with books on them. And while at the engagement party for their wedding, Angela sneaks off to open the safe and start taking all the money that she can carry. However, she runs right into Raven, who witnesses her betrayal. And he tells her that the money doesn't really matter to him. She can have all of that. And he consistently always says that despite everything that he is, she could still love him. And she says that she never could really love him, nor had she ever really loved him. So he whistles. It destroys Angela's face, and when she returns home, her boyfriend sees what's happened to her and goes insane as she continuously repeats, "You could still love me." Now, the second story is introduced by the great vampire filmmaker Linton Busotsky, which is an anagram of Milton Subotsky, who produced this film in reality. A kid intended to be a young Linton is sent off to school by his mother, played by Britt Eklund. And he's warned to never speak to strangers. It's vitally important that he not speak to strangers, nor is he allowed to bring anybody over to their home. Now, up from the basement comes Linton's father, Manfred, played by Richard Johnson. And Manfred works only at night. He's always sleeping during the day, so he can't play with his son when his son's awake most of the time. And his thing is he always finds people who have a little bit too much than their fair share, and he helps lighten that bounty from them. And on top of that, he does get a little nutritional benefit from this activity as well. But just as his mother told Linton to never speak to strangers, Manfred tells his son to beware of men who carry violin cases. At school, kids bully and tease little Linton, and watching this from the bushes is a priest, or at least somebody who is dressed as a priest, named Pickering, and he's played by Donald Pleasance. And by the way, having Donald Pleasance creeping around the school, watching children from the bushes is just hilarious in this. Donald Pleasance is always somebody who seems like he's on the verge of being crazy in every movie that he's in. This doesn't help his case. But he even comes to Linton's aid when the kids are picking on him. And Pickering tries to befriend Linton, and Linton unknowingly tells Pickering a little bit too much. And Pickering suggests that the little boy go into the basement and awaken his father early so that they may play together. But, it might be best to wait until his mother go out and never tell her what he's doing. And Pickering then signals to a van full of guys who all carry violin cases. And when Linton goes into the basement to wake his father early, he's surprised to see his father sleeps in a coffin like a vampire. And as Linton runs away, he runs right into Pickering and his guys, and these guys are sworn to remove the blight of vampirism. Manfred has been Pickering's most troubling and ongoing case of his career. So they go into the basement where Pickering wants the boy to watch the end of his father, which is kind of dark, really. But Pickering stakes Manfred despite Mrs. Busotsky coming in and screaming and trying to distract Pickering. But before dying, Manfred bites Pickering deeply, which turns him into a vampire. His men have to stake Pickering and take him out of the house. And once they leave, Manfred pops back up and says that he always wears a stake-proof vest full of ketchup. And the Busotsky family is happily reunited. Now, our third story in this anthology begins with a beautiful woman descending a dusty old crypt to discover a vampire sleeping in a coffin. However, this is just a movie. The director of this movie, Sam, played by Stuart Whitman, is looking for interesting places for him to shoot his creepy gothic movie. And he finds a somewhat secluded place in the British countryside, and he comes into the foggy and rundown old place to find a peculiar innkeeper played by Patrick McGee. And he says that he won't be able to leave tonight and that Sam will have to stay there. And soon all the townspeople, who look rather ghoulish, kind of pack into the inn. And sure enough, when Sam tries to leave, he discovers several wires in his car's engine have been cut. So he is indeed stuck there at the inn. Now, he meets Luna, the innkeeper's lovely daughter, and Luna asks if everyone dresses like Sam on the outside. And Luna says what all the others who live there, they get their clothing from the boxes in the ground. And Luna says that her mother was from the outside, and she was put into a box when Luna was born. She was later dug up for, quote, good eating. But there are no more boxes to get clothing or that good eating any longer. Now, Luna is what's called a humgoo, and this is a hybrid of a human and a ghoul, as explained in the wraparound story by Aramis. Now, Sam realizes he's in a pretty bad place, so he begs Luna to try to help him get out of there. He goes into the town's church, which no one else in town enters, and he discovered that the truth about the place, basically. And ghouls descended upon this village centuries ago. And the village wanted to kill the first ghoul they discovered, but the preacher of the town protected the ghoul, thinking it was godly of him to basically protect this creature that was being hunted by the other people and by the other villagers. Now, later on, he discovered that ghoul was eating a corpse that it had dug up. So, realizing this thing was not godly, he chases, the villagers chase it away. And when they do so, a bunch more came in and basically took over the town by nesting there and mating with the villagers. So he sees the other villagers attacking Luna, so he takes across from the church to defend himself and save her. Luna says the elders are coming this night, and when they get there, there will be no escape for Sam. So Sam and Luna make a run for it, but Luna is struck in the head by a rock thrown by one of the villagers and dies. Sam gets to the road and flags down a police car, and he asks to be taken to the police station to explain the story, only to discover that he's being returned to the village as the elders always get a police escort. After the final story, Aramis suggests that Chetwynd Hayes become a full member of the Monster Club, and when he is met with resistance, Aramis tells of all the horrors that humans can do and how many of their own kind they've eliminated. And it turns out humans are the greatest monsters of them all, and happily Chetwynd Hayes is made a full member of the Monster Club, and all of the monsters rejoice and dance along to their club's theme song. Now let's talk about 3 things that I like about the Monster Club. There's enough generally going on here that I'm not going to limit my likes to the stories told, but encompass as much fair appreciation across the board. First, I know that Chetwynd Hayes doesn't appreciate the tone of this movie, but I actually do. I think this is a marvelously fun little anthology. There's a variety show feeling to this movie. Each story has a different feel. The first story is melancholy with a twist. The second is a little more comedic with a twist. The third story has a bit more of a Twilight Zone feel to it. And I would say with a twist, but all Twilight Zone episodes had a twist. But clearly this is trying to appeal to a younger audience, where Hammer's classier gothic mood and Amicus kind of playing to adults with their other anthologies kind of kept things a tad too stuffy for most teens and younger folks. But the attitude of this movie feels so much lighter and younger and more energetic. And I'll have something more to say about the music in a bit, but the wraparound story always is showcasing a musical performance and is very obviously trying to pull in that late 70s, early 80s pop rock audience. And in particular, around almost like a music video MTV feel to it. And I like that it's trying to be different than what we normally see from this era as well. And it's just that variety show kind of feel. It's you get a little bit more than just 3 stories with a few monsters here and there. You get a little bit of a rock concert too. But second, this is a pretty top-tier cast. Roy Ward Baker commented on the quality of this cast, and I agree. You've got Carradine and Price, who are wonderful together. You can always see in their scenes that these two are the longtime pros, and they work exceptionally well off of each other. Pleasance is having a blast as Pickering. And because there is a little bit of a lighter tone in that story with Pleasance, he's having fun with it. And you can really see that in the way he creeps around and the way he talks to the little kid. And it's great. The first story has maybe the biggest range of acting, as you have Barbara Kellerman playing this kind of tortured soul who doesn't really want to go through with betraying Raven and being kind of an evil person. James Lawrenson is Raven. He's also quite good. You really feel bad for him. You get the melancholy of that character. The stories are fairly well written, but it's the cast that helps keep this movie extremely watchable. Third, I almost want to kick myself for this, only because it is kind of silly, but the music is amazing in this. We have a song called Monsters Rule OK by The Viewers. I don't know if that is saying that monsters rule okay, like monsters rule okay, or if it's trying to say something like monsters rule okay. I think it's kind of the latter. I think the song is saying that the monsters are okay and they also rule okay. You know, not the greatest, but pretty good, all things considered. Then you've got the Pretty Things singing the title track, while we also have other songs like Sucker for Your Love, The Stripper. These are all really poppy rock songs. You kind of just have to chuckle at the music in these performances. Plus, we're supposed to be in a monster nightclub, but there aren't really any monsters. Sure, you have some people with fangs, so I guess they're either werewolves or vampires or whatever. But, most of the people are very clearly just wearing masks. And I think we're supposed to think of them as ghouls, but I just kind of think that they're kooky kids hanging out in a fun little monster-themed club. And that adds to my idea that this was really a pretty light PG horror movie that could really kind of be a hit with kiddos. But going back to that song, The Stripper, there's a part in this movie where all the people at the Monster Club are listening to the band perform The Stripper, and then they're watching a girl dance. And she comes out in kind of like a lady vampire outfit and gown. And as she kind of continues to strip off the clothing, you can tell that the movie is going to kind of switch how it's being shot. And soon you just kind of see her silhouette, and it's all rotoscope animation too. And she takes off the last bit of her clothing, and then she starts peeling her arms off, her legs off, her torso skin off. And now she's just a skeleton dancing around at that point. It's really cute. It's fun. It's a neat little animation scene that kind of blends nicely with the feel of the movie. It's charming as hell, and that's the perfect word for all of this movie. Charming. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieenema.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. Next time, we stick with the anthologies and look at an actual Amicus film as we visit the house that dripped blood. Until next week, stay spooky.